You're listening to Faith Community Church's weekly podcast. We hope this week's message from God is insightful and an inspiration to you.
Well, I want to start by telling you a story that you probably will relate to. At least you'll relate to the didn't go according to what my aspirations had hoped and the effort I put in. It was a great moment when it got started. It was a great moment to seize this incredible opportunity because UCSC students, they were finding their way to this alternative worship gathering we called Genesis. I was pastoring this alternative worship gathering at Twin Lakes Church across town years ago. And a handful of these UCSC students, they were worshiping with us, and they pulled me aside and they told me that, hey, Pastor Andy, there's other students up there on the hill that would be interested to hear about the good news about Jesus, but here's the thing, UCSC students don't have rides. They don't have cars. Which, by the way, just a sidebar, one of the things Jamie is finding is we have UCSC students who want to come and worship here with us, and that's still true to this day. They don't have cars. So if any of you are like hearing this story going, I could give them a ride to and from worship, let Jamie know, because it's still true. And so I heard that they would maybe want to come to this worship service. Well, the thing is that the church I was at, Twin Lakes, had just sold their 1970s era orange-colored buses, which were really nasty colored. But anyway, they had sold them because they had something like 1 million miles on or whatever on those buses. And but I was like, we need a bus. I think a bus would be the great thing. And so I was able to convince the church leaders to buy this really, really, really cheap, old yellow school bus. It was dingy and beat up. But I knew, okay, it's an old yellow school bus. No UCSC student in their right mind is going to want to hop on an old yellow school bus to come to church, right? So because I wasn't afraid of hard work, our ministry team, we got that old bus, and I remember being on top of the bus, and we were like scrubbing it and getting it all clean, and then we literally with rollers and paint brushes, we painted the thing white, perfectly white, and then after we painted it perfectly white, I recruited a local graffiti artist to tag it basically on both sides of the bus with these like Santa Cruz theme, like cool scenes of Santa Cruz. And then I recruited a volunteer who was more than willing to drive up to UCSC, pick up students, and bring them to our worship gathering. And so it was all good to go. And so they drove up there, and no students got on the bus. Week 1. No students got on the bus week 2, week 3, week 4. They're just basically driving a bus and nobody's getting on it. And so the only people who were coming to the worship gathering were these other UCSC students and who had been coming. And one day I pulled them aside and I said, why aren't these new students taking advantage of the bus? And one of the young men told me boldly and bluntly, he said this, yeah, our friends think the bus is embarrassing. Sorry, dude. Our friends think the bus is embarrassing. Sorry, dude. All of that work, and it was work for nothing, on a bus that I thought, okay, we're doing something that's going to be a blessing and a positive thing. And the students, as I kind of processed it later, was like, okay, I get it. For them, it was embarrassing. And I tell you that because that was not the first time, and nor is it going to be the last time in my life, when I have found myself working really, really hard for really good reasons, only to end up really disappointed by the results. Now, you probably can relate, I'm gonna guess. Real effort followed by real disappointment, and sometimes even disillusionment, it's a common experience, right? For all of us in our work, super common experience. Now, here's why this is important to have this conversation, because we've been in this series, Life on Purpose. We've been talking about how, from the Bible's perspective, all of our honest, ethical work, it actually matters. From like the smallest thing we do to like sweeping up at home or to the most grandiose big thing that everybody goes, look at what you've done, and everything in between. It really matters. We've been talking about that. And it all furthers God's good intentions, and it makes God's love visible in the world. And we're like, great, that's awesome. But what we haven't yet talked about is how work can be extremely frustrating, where it's 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back. That's the dance, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back kind of headache in our work. It can be low yield in fruitfulness. It never seems to, I don't know if this is true in your life, but I could say I think it's true in my life. It never delivers the outcome we imagined when we started the work effort. It just doesn't ever hit that. And sometimes it just brings a complete failure, like the embarrassing love bus that we sent up to UCSC. Just total failure, pound fail. You put in full effort on your part, and all the outcome is it's just failure. And so what we're doing and where this goes is that what happens a lot is this frustration, it leads to sometimes 2 different extremes. One of the extremes is it leads us into idealism, which is sort of like an act of doubling down on being an idealist, where we just simply say, nope, I don't care how frustrating it is, my work is going to change things. I will change things. It's going to accomplish something necessary in the world. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to bring justice. I'm going to bring change. And that's how we kind of handle the frustration. Like we just double down on the idealism. The other one, which is probably more of where maybe most of us swing, is maybe towards cynicism, where the frustration comes to this point where we believe, don't get your hopes up. We kind of become Eeyore. Don't get your hopes up. Don't care too much. Expect nothing. And that way you won't ever be disappointed. And then just get out of it whatever you can, and that's kind of the best you can do. And then sometimes what we do to try to deal with this frustration in work is we ricochet between those 2 extremes, trying to sort of make sense of it all and trying to be okay with all the frustration and the fruitlessness that we feel. Today, like I said, we're continuing this fall study, Life on Purpose, because one of the biggest mission fields of our lives is where we work. We spend a lot of our life, like half at least of our life, and I hope it's not more than half, and you have a good work-life balance, but you spend a lot of your time at work. And a lot of us Christians, what we do is we haven't thought through how to integrate faith and work. Where faith for some of us is like, I read my Bible, I'll let you fill in the blank, how often you do. I pray, you fill in what X is for you. I go to church, I'll let you fill in how often you can dedicate yourself to worshiping with God's people. And I even go so far as I go to a community group on the regular, and I'll let you fill in what X is for you, right? And so we have that, but then we go, that's that over there, and then this is my work. And then we don't know more than like, I guess I'm supposed to be more nice than most people, and that's the most integration we do with it. Well, what we're trying to do is have this conversation from Scripture, is that the Scriptures have this very huge, beautiful picture that every one of us, regardless of what our job is, our role, our position, or whether we're paid to do it, we're participant in God's good work of building the people and the places and the institutions that build up people and build up justice and build up goodness and build up beauty in the world. But here's the question. What about all of the fruitlessness and frustration that this honest, ethical work we do, what do we do with that? That's what we're going to talk about today. Well, and let's just get started. There's this thing called sin that detonated in the Garden of Eden. And right after it detonated, you're in the passage, Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. Right after the sin bomb went off, God turned to the first human beings, his image bearers, Adam and Eve, and here's what we read from the Scripture. To the woman, he said, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. To Adam, he said, because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. This is God's precious word. Now, what Genesis 3 does is it gives us this account of how things in our world fell apart and continue to fall apart. Now, if you were with us a couple weeks ago in Genesis chapter 2, before the fall, we find out we were originally created to know and to serve and to love God supremely. And that when we lived by that original beautiful design where God was our supreme love, we would thrive. But now in Genesis chapter 3, we find out, what does the human race decide? Well, not supreme love and trust of God. We decide, here's a better plan, supreme trust of me. And once we chose supreme trust of ourselves, things started to fall apart. They fell apart. And here's what we read of what happens in the immediate aftermath of it in Genesis chapter 3. We didn't read it in our passage, but if you want to look at it, glance at verse 7. It says, here's what happened in the immediate aftermath. It says, they realized they were naked. They had been naked before, but now they realize, we are this thing called being naked. They realize it. Meaning, here's what it means. Shame. That intense feeling of unease about being myself in my skin, which is the prevalent psychological issue of our age. Shame that's both hard to admit and hard to identify suddenly enters human existence. That's where it got started. The second thing it tells us at the immediate aftermath, same verse 7, it also says they made coverings for themselves. So here's what it means. Distrust and fear of others now comes into the human experience. That wasn't there before. So much, by the way, distrust and fear of other people that we now go into life, starting from the fall, as mask wearers. We wear masks when we go into relationship rather than showing up fully as our vulnerable selves. That's what got detonated. The other thing it says, if you look at verse 10 through 13, it tells us, and you get to see some of the gospel tracings already. They fall into sin. Does God ghost Adam and Eve? Does God say, I'm done with you? No. God goes, where are you? God goes after them. And then he goes and he finds them and he says, what's happened? And when God graciously pursues them and he says, what's happened? What do they do? Both Adam and Eve deflect and they defend themselves, or they deny blame. Deflect and deny blame. That enters the human picture. Any of you familiar with that territory? Ever done that? Okay, good. As Old Testament, good for you. That's great. As Old Testament scholar Alec Motyer, he accurately describes it this way. Here's what he says. He says, quote, from the moment of the fall, humankind has suffered from moral schizophrenia, neither able to deny sinfulness nor acknowledge it for what it is, unquote. So here's what we see. Sin goes off. The bomb explodes in the garden. We probably would have done the same thing. And it goes off, and then all these things take place, and this is where we hit our passage. So then God comes along, and he informs Adam and Eve that the two great, beautiful tasks of life, which were going to be before the fall and are still after the fall, the two tasks of love and work, were now going to have some consequences loaded with them. Love and work now had some consequences. To Eve, God describes these two big consequences. First, he says, childbearing was now going to become painful and it was going to become difficult. So what happens is the near miraculous experience of shared love between a woman and a man procreating other image bearers of God. Oh, wow. That was still going to happen, but it would be a really painful process. The second thing God told her is God said, I'm going to just read it. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you this morning. There are really good Bible scholars who have wide opinions about what that thing means. I will not be able to land the plane for you on this one today. I think it's probably better to just simply say this from all the different opinions of what this could be saying. I'm going to read from Pastor Timothy Keller what he says. He says, look, regardless of the scholarship, all at least agree that it means that at least misunderstanding, frustration, deep conflict, and unhappiness are now the norm in relationships between women and men. Those are the consequences. But God didn't leave Adam out of it. To Adam, in our passage, God describes two other consequences. The first one is this. God says, the ground is now going to be cursed, and it's going to produce thorns and thistles along with the food. So man goes from, let me get this straight, Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, man goes from God saying, you can eat, there's an eating theme here. You can eat from any tree that's in the Garden of Eden, any of them. And then, except for this one, and really which was about, do you trust me? Don't eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So he goes from, we can eat of any tree, to stolen fruit from the tree God said, don't eat that, to now he's only going to be able to eat through very hard, very difficult labor. And the second thing God said is this. He says, by the sweat of your brow, you will be able to eat your food. Another Old Testament scholar who also happens to be a friend that Alita and I have met at summer camps, Sandy Richter, Dr. Sandy Richter, who's the chair of Old Testament at Westmont, she suggests that this term is not talking so much like most of the time we read it, we go, oh, sweat of your brow, okay, yeah. Now it's like, it's hard, it makes you sweat. No, because probably even before the fall, Adam and Eve had to sweat in taking care of the garden temple. So that's not what he's getting at. She says it's not so much about talking about hard physical exertion, but what it's getting at is deep anxiety. You see, this lovely world before the fall that once generated predictable outcomes for the effort put in by Adam and Eve. So it was once a world in which Adam and Eve could say, if I put in exactly this X effort, I know I'm going to get out this Y result. I just know this is how it works. But now this becomes this wholly unpredictable world, generating great anxiety in our work, where I know I'm going to put in X. I might even put X times 2, and I don't know what kind of Y result I'm going to get, producing in us great anxiety. Like, I don't even know what I'm going to get from the effort I put in. So what we're getting at is here, Genesis 3 is telling us our work now takes place in a world. It's got two things going on simultaneously, and we have to be really good at understanding this. It is a world, it's still sustained by a good and generous God. And at the same time, it's a world disordered by sin. And we've got to be clear in our minds. These are both true. God is a sustaining good God, and it's a world really disordered by sin, both at the same time. And this world disordered by sin, it directly impacts our daily work, because now our work, it's frustrating, if not fruitless. We almost always are envisioning outcomes. I know it's true for me. We're envisioning outcomes much greater than we actually accomplish. And it's always going to involve conflict, people, and you're doing a really nice thing. And they might end up thinking you're demon spawn in their opinion, even though you've done good things for them. There's conflict, there's envy, there's fatigue all along the way towards not achieving your goals. There's also that reality is that our work it now becomes dangerous in this fallen world. It's dangerous. Even when our work bears fruit, it might be painful, it might miscarry, it might even sometimes kill us in this fallen world. And so here's the point that we need to really kind of get our heads wrapped around, and that is this: I can expect a regular frustration in my honest, ethical work. I can just expect it. Now, here's where this is important, because some of you are like, well, yeah, no, duh, I hate my job. So you had to spend 20 minutes to get to that point. I already knew that before I sat down. But what I'm trying to get at is the dreamer inside of you who's saying this lie, which says, but if I can get to that job, that won't have any more frustration or anything like that. And I'm telling you, you get to that job, you'll still be reading this. You still will be reading this. Now, here's the other thing I want to be really, really clear about. I understand you could look at this and feel like this point, Andy, it feels like you could misunderstand it as I thought you were just saying, don't be cynical. Doesn't that sound like a cynical observation? It can feel that way, right? Like this feels like it could be cynical. It could be so washed out of encouragement. But that is not the spirit of the point we're trying to make here. It is only when we have a clear understanding of how sin distorts our work that we can hope to counteract its effects and salvage the good that God wants us to do over the span of our lifetimes. You have to be sober about the reality. We have to understand the pure facts of how our natural state of, remember what did Adam and Eve say when they were tempted to eat the fruit? We could become like gods. Supreme trust in ourselves. Sounds pretty good. Or at the Tower of Babel, whatever, however you want to pronounce it, where we said, we will make a name for ourselves. We have to be sober about the pure facts that that disordered, sinful approach to life, it impacts our honest work. So that, not that we give up, so that we can do the work God's given us to do to further his good intentions in the world and to do it boldly, knowing what's going on. We now get to hold this intention that God's lovely plan for our work and hold it right alongside the frustrations that work brings us into this currently fallen world. And when we understand the complete picture, here's what it helps us to do. It helps us to steer away from the constant distraction of looking over the horizon at that perfect job where there will never, ever be any frustrations, and all of my aspirations will finally come true because I will be paid enough, and I'll have enough money behind my dreams, and I'll have the perfect staff to support me. When you know this, it will protect you against constantly being distracted, looking at a horizon that doesn't exist. And instead, to help you be more present in the job that's at hand, which is the one you're in right now. It also helps to encourage us that just because we haven't met our highest aspirations in our work, I'd love to meet anybody here who has. You've actually met all of your highest aspirations, because I'd love to know how you did that. But this is to encourage us that because you haven't necessarily met your highest aspirations, it doesn't mean you're in the wrong place, right? That's the common conclusion. If you don't know what the scriptures are teaching you. Oh, I'm in the wrong place, or I chose the wrong college. I'm in the wrong college. I'm in the wrong major. I'm doing in the wrong studies. I'm in the wrong career. It's to encourage you to go, that may not really be what's going on. It may just be, it's a world that's fallen and your work is frustrating, like every job is. It also helps to make us more resilient because we understand that little fruit, even no fruit. It's a part of our journey of doing the good work that to God is still good work. You may have rendered an act of beauty in the world and nobody ever looked at it, but God saw it. It was an act of love and grace. Nobody ever gave you any acclaim for it, and it didn't necessarily go the way you wanted, but God saw it. It's still a part of participating in God's good endeavor of making his love visible in the world. Now, here's where this goes. In a Christianity Today article written by a female pastor, author, she and her husband are co-pastors, in an article entitled, What Makes Love Visible? I like that title, What Makes Love Visible? Norrin Voll wrestles in the article with the reality of fruitfulness in hard work for God. Now, she's talking about, as one who knows, she and her husband, in a number of places of the world, have done both church planting as well as communal living planting that actually impacts the communities around them by taking up land and helping the impoverished and the food insecure to have food by Christians in a church community making food from the earth and getting it to the food insecure. That is a doubly hard portion of, like, pastoring people, not easy. Making food come from the earth, also not easy. And so she writes about how difficult it was and almost kind of being pretty disillusioned by it. And she wrote about how a new understanding of one Hebrew word, of all things, a Hebrew word, helped her move forward in these deep frustrations in her work. And here's what she writes. She says, the Hebrew Torah, which is Old Testament, uses avoda to describe the brutal toil of the Israelite slaves in Egypt, where in Egypt the slaves were called avadim, which is a version of that word, avadim. She says, yeah, that's the word for the slaves in Egypt. It's also the word for the hard labor of the Levite priests who offered sacrifices to God in the tabernacle and later in the temple, stoking large fires, slaughtering the animals for sacrifice, lifting heavy grain sacks. Today, she says, Jews still speak of their daily prayers as avoda shebelev, which is the work or the worship that is in the heart, the work of worship. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explains that whereas a lot of English translations use a word like ceremony, service for avodah to describe Passover meal preparations, hard work would be the more accurate rendering. Here's what the rabbi says about this word I'm going to put up on the screen. He says the same word, avodah, is used to describe slavery and freedom, bondage and liberation, Egypt and Exodus. Nothing's changed. There we were avadim in Egypt. Here in the promised land, we are avadim. There we had to work for a master. Here we have to work for a master. There it was hard. Here it is hard. All that has changed is the master's identity. There it was Pharaoh. Here it is God. But we remain avadim. I think that's really helpful for us to think about and look at. As we understand and we normalize, this is important for us. There are things we have to normalize in our lives to be able to do what we're called to do, invited to do. As we normalize and we understand that frustration's a part of our work. By the way, in the very same way that our Jesus normalized and understood the deep frustrations and toil of the hard work of what he came to do when he had to take a cross in order to save us from sin and death. He understood the normalization of this. Because that's true, here's what we got to do. We got to endure in work, avodah, that makes God's love visible. It's about enduring. And it's enduring by relying on the God and the Father of our Jesus Christ, the one who gives us the grace and power to continue to do it. Now, here's what I want you to do, though, in looking at this. I want you to remember again with an even more rigorous ear what God said about the fallout of sin. Because it's easy to go, I'm just supposed to endure where it's all bad news all the time, and it's always fruitlessness, and it's always frustrating, and it's always, I'm just disillusioned all the time. Well, hold on a second. Listen to this really carefully. To Eve, God said, with painful labor, you will give birth. What is that meaning? In other words, bearing children, it's going to be challenging, it's going to be painful, and women through history know, even dangerous. But women would still bring the miracle of new life of image bearers of God into the world. It would still happen. To Adam, God said, the ground's going to produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants in the field. In other words, thorns and thistles are going to sprout up all over the place, and they're going to get in the way, and they're going to make the work really, really difficult, but humanity would still have food. Do you hear it? Pain and beautiful babies. Thorns and delicious food in a fallen world. The biblical account helps you and me to appropriately normalize the reality that our work is going to be an act of faithful endurance that is going to be both frustrating and fulfilling. That's just part of the story. And we're going to practically endure and undermine the deep frustrations. Here's how we undermine the deep frustration. We're going to do work, and we're going to do it by this. We are not going to give up. We don't give up. We just don't give up. In the frustration, we go into it normalizing, okay, I've read a lot of Christian self-help books, and I want to try to think that I control the shape and the scale of the outcomes. And we kind of grow up from what the scripture is actually telling us. We go, I don't control any of that. I don't control anything. I just control my response to what's in front of me. That's it. And so we know we don't control the scale, we don't control the shape of the outcomes in our hard work, but we're people who we don't give up. And here's how we don't give up. We don't check out. And I'm seeing a lot of that happening in people's lives right now. People just sort of checking out. It's easy. We have these attention hijacking devices called tablets and cell phones and things like that. There's all sorts of other ways where we're struggling with our own versions of self-absorption in our lives right now. But whatever is in front of us because of these jobs, we don't check out physically. We will not leave or abandon our work just because it's hard. We also won't check out emotionally. And this is sometimes for most of us where maybe more of us live, where it's like, I don't like my job, and Andy's right, there is no perfect job out there. I'm not even gonna try. So I'm just gonna show up, I'm just gonna punch my card, check the box, and not care. That's not who we are as Jesus' people. We are surrounded by people around us who need God's love to be made visible through us. That's why you're there. The other thing we're not gonna do is we're not gonna give in. In the frustration, we're not gonna enact some of our own solutions to the frustration and the fruitlessness by giving in. And what are we not going to give into? We're not going to give into idealism and go, no, I'm going to double down on a perfect world, and we are really, truly going to change it. I'm not going to double down on cynicism. Just give in to the narrative of pointlessness. And we're also not going to double down on ethical compromises, where we go, well, in times like these, Christians just got to do the hard thing because the ends justifies the means. Jesus would agree with where I'm trying to go with this outcome, and so he just knows you got to do what you got to do to get that outcome, and we are people who will not do that. I'm going to invite the band to come on up. As we close, there's one other really important piece of hopeful information that we need as we endure in our work. It's a very long-range piece of hope that we really always have to keep integrating into what we tell ourselves about God in our lives. That it's the fact that our work is going to continue to be both frustrating and fulfilling. But when our work is frustrating, here's what we can know. We can know that every honest, ethical seed we've planted in this life, even the ones that were like, I never saw a sprout come from that, somehow, when we get to heaven, we're going to see the impact that it made. It's going to be some way, we don't know it yet, we don't know how, some way tangibly connected to the renewal of all things that is to come. That act of beauty, that act of kindness, that way God's love was made visible through that thing that nobody ever saw, and the person you were even giving it to didn't even see do it. That is connected, even though it felt like a frustration and a failure. And the other thing is that when it is fulfilling, we can enjoy the fulfillment of it. Like, whoa, that came pretty close to my aspiration. We can enjoy the fulfillment, and we can enjoy the fact that that little fulfillment, it's a glimpse, just a glimpse of the beauty and the genius we're going to continually experience in our play, which will be work, but we'll call it more like play in paradise, where in eternity, we're going to be useful in the lives of others in eternity in degrees and in measures of joy and satisfaction we can't even begin to fathom. And we will bring to the work that we do in eternity skills beyond our capacity to imagine how our aspirations actually produce the outcomes that we're working on in eternity. And what we envisioned as we started our work, it's actually going to be the outcome. So that when we have little fulfillments, we carry that hope that helps us endure. It's like someday, it all's going to work out the way I had planned it when I started the work. Yeah, our work can be really hard and really frustrating. Yes, true. And yes, our work still very much matters. So we endure by God's grace in the work that He's given us, and we hold these two realities together, understanding the gospel story. Let's pray. God, the truth is that, we do need your grace and your empowerment to continue and not just give in to the frustration and just check out, whether it's emotionally, physically, or any other way. God, help us to believe that, like I just said, that even when we plant seeds of honest and ethical work and we don't see anything come of it, we can know it's somehow connected to when we reach eternity, we go, oh, that's what you did with that, God. And that, like I said, when we do have, that was closest to what I had in my head when I started the work, to go, that's just the barest drop in a thimble in an ocean of what the work's gonna feel like, the playground of eternity that we're gonna get to enjoy forever and ever, which in Revelation says that the kings of the nations show their work and they showcase it to you, God. Like we're gonna be those people who go, look what I made in honor of you, King of Kings. And it will be exactly what we had in our heads when we made that song, we wrote that book, we gardened in the garden. Whatever it is that's going to be in eternity, that's the hope of what we have, and that's how we hold on, and that's why we endure. Help us in this, God. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for listening to this production of Faith Community Church in Santa Cruz, California. To visit our complete archive of sermons, to learn more about FCC, or to view our live streaming services, please visit us online at santacruzfaith.org.